"We're here to discuss your failing company," Dad announced to everyone. Mum nodded sadly. That's when my sister gasped, staring at her phone. "Why is your face on Forbes' 30 under 30 list?" The room went silent. Hey everyone, I'm about to share a story that completely changed how I see family dynamics in business. If you've ever felt underestimated by people closest to you, hit that subscribe button. Because by the end of this story, you'll understand why believing in yourself matters more than anyone's opinion. Trust me, this twist will leave you speechless. My name is Sophia Chen. I'm 29 years old, and I'm the founder of a tech company that my family thought was destined for failure. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about business success. It's about what happens when the people who are supposed to believe in you the most become your biggest skeptics. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I was always what my parents called the dreamer of the family. While my older brother Michael was dissecting frogs and talking about medical school at age 12, and my younger sister Emma was already arguing like a future lawyer. At 10, I was the kid who took apart every electronic device in the house just to see how it worked. I'll never forget the Christmas when I was 14. My parents had saved up to buy me this beautiful jewellery making kit, complete with beads, wire, and an instruction manual for feminine crafts, as my mum called them. Meanwhile, they got Michael a chemistry set and Emma a debate club membership. When I asked if I could have a computer programming book instead, my dad laughed and said, "Sweetheart, technology isn't really for girls. You should focus on something more suitable." That word, suitable, it haunted me through my entire childhood. Everything I was passionate about was deemed unsuitable for a young woman. When I joined the robotics club in high school, my mum worried I was becoming too masculine. When I got accepted to MIT for computer science, they tried to convince me to switch to education so I could have a stable career teaching. The breaking point came during my college graduation. Michael had just finished his first year of medical school at Northwestern, and my parents were so proud they could barely contain themselves. They spent the entire graduation dinner talking about his upcoming residency applications and how he was already getting recruitment letters from top hospitals. When someone asked about my plans to work at a tech startup in Silicon Valley, my dad actually said, "Oh, Sophia's just experimenting. She'll figure out what she really wants to do eventually." I remember sitting there holding my computer science degree, summa cum laude by the way, and feeling like I was invisible in my own family. Emma, who was still in law school, got more respect for her future career than I did for my actual achievements. But the real devastation came 2 years later when I announced I was dropping out of my MBA program to start my own company. I had been working at a tech firm in San Francisco, learning everything I could about artificial intelligence and machine learning, when I had this breakthrough idea for enterprise software that could revolutionize how companies handle data analysis. I was so excited when I flew home to Chicago to tell my family. I had prepared this whole presentation, market research, competitive analysis, financial projections. I thought they would finally see that I wasn't just playing around with computers. I was building something real, something important. Instead, the conversation went like this. "Mum, Dad, I have incredible news. I'm leaving the MBA program to start my own company." My dad put down his coffee cup so hard it made everyone jump. You're doing what? I've identified a gap in the market for AI-powered data analytics tools for small businesses. The potential is enormous, and I already have interest from 3 potential clients. Sophia, stop! My mother held up her hand. Just stop! Do you hear yourself right now? What do you mean? Michael, who was visiting from his medical residency, leaned forward. Soph, starting a business is incredibly risky. 90% of startups fail within the first year. But the ones that succeed... honey, my dad interrupted, you need to be realistic. You're 25 years old. You have no business experience, no management training, and frankly, no idea what you're getting yourself into. I've been working in tech for 3 years. I understand the industry. Working for someone else is completely different from running your own company, Emma chimed in from across the room. Do you have any idea how much legal compliance is involved? Insurance, liability, you could lose everything. My mum reached across the table and patted my hand like I was a child. Sweetheart, we love that you're ambitious, but this isn't practical. Finish your MBA, get a good job at a stable company. Maybe meet a nice man who can provide security. That's a real plan. What if I don't want security? What if I want to build something? Build what exactly? My dad's voice was getting louder. Some fantasy tech company that exists only in your imagination. Sophia, you're living in a dream world. We're not going to fund this, my mother added firmly. We've already invested enough in your education. We won't watch you throw your life away on some startup nonsense. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I'm not asking you to fund it. I'm asking you to believe in me. We do believe in you, my dad said, but his tone suggested otherwise. We believe you're smart enough to make better choices than this. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to my parents talking in hushed voices downstairs. I could only catch fragments. Completely unrealistic. Needs to grow up. Worried about her future. The next morning at breakfast, my mum tried a different approach. Honey, I talked to Mrs. Patterson next door. Her daughter Sarah just got promoted to marketing director at a Fortune 500 company. She makes excellent money, has great benefits, and she's engaged to a wonderful accountant. That's the kind of life that brings real happiness. Mum, I don't want Sarah's life, I want my own life. But what kind of life is it, really? Emma asked, looking up from her law books. Working 18-hour days in some garage, eating ramen noodles, hoping that maybe someday you'll get lucky enough to sell your company to Google? That's not success, Sophia. That's gambling. Michael nodded. You could be making 6 figures right now with your MBA. Why would you give that up for something so uncertain? Because, I wanted to scream, certainty isn't everything. Because some of us dream bigger than a steady paycheck and a suburban house with a white picket fence. Because innovation requires risk, and risk requires courage, and courage is something you can't teach in business school. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I just packed my bags and moved back to San Francisco with $5,000 in savings, a used laptop, and absolutely zero support from my family. For the next 2 years, I lived exactly the life Emma had described. I rented a converted garage in Oakland for $800 a month. I ate so much ramen that I still can't look at the stuff without feeling nauseous. I coded 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, building the foundation of what would become TechFlow AI. During this time, my relationship with my family became increasingly strained. Every phone call home was an interrogation disguised as concern. "How's the business going, honey?" my mum would ask, in that tone parents use when they're hoping you'll admit defeat. "It's challenging, but we're making progress." "Are you making any money yet?" "We're reinvesting everything back into development and growth." "So, no." "It's more complicated than that, Mum. Sophia, there's no shame in admitting this isn't working out." Michael knows people at consulting firms who are always looking for smart people with tech backgrounds. "You could probably start at 70 or 80,000. I don't want a consulting job." "But you could have health insurance again, and a 401k, and maybe time to date someone. Mrs. Kim's son is a software engineer at Microsoft and he's still single." These conversations were torture. It was like my family couldn't conceive of success outside their narrow definition of career stability. To them, my company wasn't a legitimate business venture. It was an extended phase of rebellion that I would eventually outgrow. The worst part was family gatherings. During Michael's graduation from his residency program, I sat at a table full of relatives while my parents proudly introduced him as Dr. Chen to everyone who would listen. When someone asked what I did, my dad would say, "Oh, Sophia's working on some computer project." A computer project. 3 years of 18-hour days, building revolutionary software from scratch. And that's how my father described my life's work. At Emma's law school graduation party, things got even worse. She had landed a position at a prestigious firm in downtown Chicago, and my parents couldn't stop bragging about her starting salary and signing bonus. When my aunt asked about my business, my mum actually said, "We're hoping Sophia will find something more stable soon." I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 10 minutes. Here I was, building technology that could change how millions of small businesses operate. And my own mother was essentially telling people I was unemployed. The final straw came during last year's Thanksgiving dinner. Michael announced that he was getting engaged to another doctor he'd met during his fellowship. Emma shared that she'd been promoted to senior associate at her law firm. When it was my turn to share updates, I mentioned that we'd just signed our third major corporate client and were looking at expanding our team. "That's nice, dear," my mum said, absent-mindedly, already moving on to dessert plans. But Uncle Robert, my dad's brother who works in finance, leaned forward with interest. "Wait, you signed 3 corporate clients? What kind of revenue are we talking about?" I hesitated. We were doing well, better than well actually, but I had learned not to share too many details with my family. "We're growing steadily." "But are you profitable yet?" he pressed. "We're reinvesting." "So still no," my dad interrupted. "Sophia, at some point you have to start making money, not just spending it." "Dad, Amazon didn't turn a profit for 7 years." "Amazon is Amazon. He gestured vaguely. "You're just starting out." Michael, trying to be supportive in his own way, said, "Maybe you should consider pivoting. There might be opportunities to license your technology to established companies instead of trying to build a whole business from scratch." "Why would I license my technology when I can build the company myself?" "Because it's safer," Emma explained, as if I were a child who didn't understand basic economics. You get paid up front. You don't have to worry about operations or scaling or competition. You could probably make enough to buy a house, settle down. There it was again. Their obsession with safety, with settling down, with choosing the path that guaranteed mediocrity over the one that offered possibility. I looked around the table at my family. These people who claimed to love me but couldn't see past their own limited vision of what my life should look like. Michael would be a respected doctor, Emma would be a successful lawyer, and I would be... what? The cautionary tale? The dreamer who never learned to dream smaller? That night, I made a decision. I was done trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I was destined to fail. I was done seeking approval from people who couldn't recognize success unless it came with a traditional job title and a benefits package. But I didn't stop hoping that someday they would see what I was building. Someday they would understand that some dreams are too big to fit into their small ideas about what a woman should want from life. I just had no idea that someday would come in the form of a family intervention designed to save me from my own success. Fast forward to 3 weeks ago. I was in my real office now, not a garage, but a beautiful space in downtown San Francisco with floor-to-ceiling windows and a team of 12 brilliant engineers and designers. We had just closed our Series B funding round for $50 million. Forbes had called to schedule an interview for their 30 under 30 list. 3 Fortune 500 companies were piloting our software, and we were getting acquisition inquiries from tech giants I dreamed of working with as a kid. But my family didn't know any of this. It wasn't that I was trying to hide my success. I just had learned to keep my professional life separate from my family life. Every time I'd shared good news in the past, it had been met with skepticism or dismissive comments about getting ahead of myself. So I'd stopped sharing. When my mum called that Tuesday evening, I was actually in the middle of a celebration dinner with my team. We'd just gotten confirmation that our Forbes feature would be published the following week. Sophia, honey, I think it's time we had a serious conversation. I stepped outside the restaurant, away from the laughter and champagne toasts. What kind of conversation, Mom? About your future, about this business situation. Business situation, not company, not startup, not even venture situation. What about it? Your father and I have been talking and we're concerned. It's been 3 years, sweetheart. We think it might be time to consider other options. What kind of other options? Come home for the weekend. We'll all sit down together. Michael and Emma will be here too. We just want to help you figure out a plan that makes sense. I almost laughed. Here I was standing outside a restaurant where I just toasted the biggest funding round in our company's history. And my mother was planning an intervention to save me from my failing business. But you know what? I was curious. After 3 years of being treated like the family disappointment, I wanted to see exactly what this conversation would look like. I wanted to hear what they thought my life looked like from the outside. Okay, I said. I'll be there this weekend. Oh, wonderful. We just want what's best for you, honey. You'll see. As I hung up the phone and walked back into the restaurant, my co-founder Jake raised his glass. Everything okay? Perfect, I said, grinning. Actually, it's about to be very, very interesting. Because I had decided that this family meeting would indeed be a conversation about my future, just not the kind they were expecting. That Saturday morning, I flew from San Francisco to Chicago with a mix of anticipation and amusement. I had deliberately not mentioned anything about the Forbes article, which was scheduled to go live that very afternoon. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. As my Uber pulled into my parents' driveway, I could see Michael's BMW and Emma's Audi already parked outside. The whole family was here for what they thought would be my professional funeral. I checked my phone one more time. The Forbes article would be published in about 4 hours. Walking into my childhood home, I was immediately struck by the formal atmosphere. This wasn't going to be a casual family chat over coffee. The living room had been arranged like a conference room, with chairs positioned in a semicircle facing the couch where I was clearly meant to sit. It felt like an intervention, which I realised was exactly what it was. "Sophia!" My mum hugged me tightly, and I could feel the tension in her shoulders. "I'm so glad you're here. We've all been so worried about you." Michael stood up from his chair, looking every inch the successful doctor in his pressed khakis and polo shirt. "Hey sis, good to see you." Emma barely looked up from her phone, where she was probably reviewing legal briefs, even on a Saturday. "Hi, Sophia." And then there was my dad, standing by the fireplace, with his hands clasped behind his back, like he was about to deliver a State of the Union address. Uncle Robert was there too, which surprised me. Clearly they'd called in reinforcements for this conversation. "Sit down, sweetheart," my mum said, gesturing to the couch. "We want to talk to you about something important." I settled into the couch, trying not to smile at the absurdity of the situation. Here I was, about to be featured on one of the most prestigious business publications in the world, and my family had staged an intervention to convince me to give up my career. My dad cleared his throat and began what was obviously a prepared speech. "Sophia, we love you very much, and because we love you, we need to have an honest conversation about your future." "Okay," I said simply. "We've watched you struggle for 3 years now. We've seen you sacrifice your health, your social life, your financial security, all for this business venture that, frankly, isn't showing the results we hope to see." Michael leaned forward in his chair. "Sophia, I've been doing some research on startup success rates. The statistics are pretty sobering. Only about 10% of startups survive past the first year, and even fewer become profitable within 5 years. And the stress," my mum added, her voice full of concern. "Every time we talk to you, you sound exhausted. You're working all the time. You never mention dating anyone. You're living in that tiny apartment. This isn't the life we wanted for you." Emma finally looked up from her phone. "I've been talking to partners at my firm who have clients in tech. They say the competition in AI and data analytics is incredibly fierce. You're competing against companies with hundreds of millions in funding and decades of experience." Uncle Robert nodded gravely. "From a financial perspective, you're burning through your savings with no clear path to profitability. That's not sustainable, Sophia. At some point, you have to cut your losses." I listened to all of this with growing amazement. They had clearly put a lot of thought into this intervention, gathering statistics and examples to support their argument that I should give up. What they didn't realise was that every concern they were raising, competition, funding, market challenges, these were problems I had already solved. So what exactly are you suggesting? I asked. My dad sat down across from me. We think it's time to consider other options. Michael has been talking to some colleagues who might be able to help you transition into healthcare technology consulting. The pay is excellent, the work is stable, and you'd be using your technical skills in a meaningful way. Or, Emma added, there are several legal tech companies in Chicago that are looking for people with your background. You could move back home, work for an established company, maybe start thinking about settling down. I've actually been talking to Sarah Patterson's mom, my mother said brightly. Remember Sarah? She's doing so well in marketing now. She says her company is always looking for people who understand technology. You could probably start at $70,000 or $80,000 with full benefits. The irony was overwhelming. Here they were, trying to convince me to take a job that paid less in a year than my company had made in revenue the previous month. And there's no shame in admitting that entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, Uncle Robert added kindly. Most people aren't cut out to be business owners. It takes a very specific type of person to succeed in that world. I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest. The same anger I'd felt every time they dismissed my ambitions. Every time they suggested I wasn't cut out for something just because I was young or female or dared to dream bigger than their suburban expectations. But then I remembered what my mentor Maria Rodriguez had told me 6 months ago. Success is the best revenge, but only if you don't let bitterness poison it. So instead of getting angry, I smiled. You've all put a lot of thought into this. We just want what's best for you, my mum said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. I know you do, but before we continue this conversation, I'm curious. What exactly makes you think my business is failing? Michael exchanged glances with Emma well, you never talk about revenue or profits. You're still living in that small apartment. You work constantly, but never seem to have any money to show for it. You never bring anyone to family events, Emma added. No business partners, no investors, no employees. It feels like you're working in isolation. And when we ask direct questions about how things are going, my dad said gently, you're always vague. It's challenging, but we're making progress. That doesn't sound like success to me. I nodded thoughtfully. They weren't entirely wrong. I had been vague about my business, but not for the reasons they thought. What if I told you that the reason I don't talk about revenue is because I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable? What do you mean? My mom asked. And what if I told you that the reason I don't bring business partners to family events is because my business partners are some of the most sought-after people in Silicon Valley, and I wasn't sure you'd believe me. Uncle Robert frowned. Sophia, what are you trying to say? I pulled out my phone and checked the time. The Forbes article had been live for about an hour now. Perfect timing. I'm saying that maybe you don't know as much about my business as you think you do. My dad's expression hardened slightly. Sophia, if you're trying to convince us that everything is fine when we can clearly see... That's when Emma's phone buzzed with a news notification. She glanced at it absently, then froze. Wait, she said slowly, staring at her screen. Wait a minute. What is it? Michael asked. Emma's face had gone completely white. She looked up at me, then back at her phone, then at me again. "Why?" she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why is your face on Forbes' 30 under 30 list?" The room went completely silent. My dad reached for Emma's phone. "What are you talking about?" Emma handed it over, and I watched my father's face go through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something that might have been shock. "Sophia Chen, CEO of TechFlow AI," he read aloud, his voice getting quieter with each word. "Founded in 2021, TechFlow AI has revolutionized data analytics for small and medium-sized businesses, serving over 200 corporate clients and generating $15 million in annual recurring revenue." My mum snatched the phone from his hands. "That can't be right. Sophia, is this real?" Michael was already pulling up the article on his own phone. "Holy shit," he breathed, then immediately apologized for swearing. "Sophia, this says your company just raised $50 million in Series B funding." $50 million? Uncle Robert's voice cracked. "Led by Andreessen Horowitz and including participation from Sequoia Capital," Emma read from her phone, her legal training helping her process information quickly. "The funding will be used to expand TechFlow AI's machine learning capabilities and accelerate growth in the enterprise market." The silence that followed was deafening. I could literally hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. My dad looked up from the phone, his face a mixture of confusion and something that might have been awe. "Sophia, are you actually worth $50 million? "Well, technically, the company is valued at about $200 million post-money, and I own 35%, so..." I did the math in my head. "Yeah, something like that." My mother sat down heavily in her chair. $200 million? "The article says you have 47 employees," Michael said, still scrolling through his phone, "and offices in San Francisco, Austin, and..." "You're opening an office in New York?" "Next month," I confirmed. Emma was speed reading the article with the intensity she usually reserved for legal contracts. "It says here that 3 Fortune 500 companies are already using your software, and you're in talks with 12 more." 14, actually. We signed 2 more this week. Uncle Robert was frantically calculating something on his own phone. "If you own 35% of a company worth $200 million, he looked up at me with wide eyes. "Sophia, you're worth more than all of us combined." The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. My dad set down the phone and looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "If your business is this successful, why didn't you tell us?" And there it was, the question I'd been waiting 3 years to answer. "Because," I said, my voice steady and calm, "every time I tried to share good news with you, you found a way to diminish it. Every time I talked about growth or potential or possibilities, you reminded me about failure rates and risk factors and why I should be more realistic." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the suburban street where I'd grown up dreaming of something bigger. "When I told you we landed our first client, you asked if it was enough to pay my rent. When I told you we were hiring employees, you warned me about the liability of being responsible for other people's salaries. When I tried to explain what we were building, you suggested I get a real job with benefits. I turned back to face them. So I stopped sharing. I stopped trying to convince you that I knew what I was doing because, frankly, I realized that your belief in me wasn't necessary for my success. My mom's eyes were filling with tears. Sophia, we were just worried about you. I know you were, but your worry was based on the assumption that I didn't know what I was doing, that I was naive or reckless or living in some kind of fantasy. Michael set down his phone. We had no idea things were going so well. Because you never asked. Not really, you asked if I was making money, but you never asked about the technology we were developing. You asked if I was being realistic, but you never asked about our growth strategy or our competitive advantages or why some of the smartest investors in the world thought our company was worth $50 million. Emma looked genuinely confused. But why would you keep this from us? This is incredible news. Because I learned that I didn't need your approval to be successful. And honestly, I wasn't sure you'd believe me even if I told you. Uncle Robert shook his head slowly. Sophia, if you had known what? You would have supported me. You would have believed in me. I sat back down on the couch. The thing is, I needed you to believe in me before you knew I was successful. I needed you to support my dreams when they were just dreams, not after they became profitable. My dad was staring at the Forbes article on his phone like he was trying to decode a foreign language. I can't wrap my head around this. How did we get it so wrong? You got it wrong because you assumed that your definition of success was the only valid one. Doctor, lawyer, consultant, those were real careers. Entrepreneur was just a fancy word for unemployed. My mum reached for my hand. Sweetheart, that's not fair. We just wanted you to be secure. But I didn't want security, Mom. I wanted possibility. I wanted to build something that mattered, something that could change how businesses operate, something that could create jobs for dozens of people and value for thousands of customers. I pulled up our company website on my phone and showed them the testimonials page. Look at these reviews. Small business owners saying our software helped them increase efficiency by 40%. Startups saying we helped them scale from 10 employees to 100. This is what I was building while you were worried about my 401k. Michael was reading over my shoulder. This company in Detroit says you helped them save $2 million in operational costs. And this nonprofit in Portland says your software helped them serve 30% more clients with the same staff, Emma added, her lawyer's eye catching the details. My dad looked up from the article. Sophia, I owe you an apology. We all do, my mum said quickly. We completely misjudged the situation. But here's the thing. I wasn't looking for apologies. I was looking for understanding. I don't need you to apologize for being worried about me, I said. I need you to understand that your worry came from a place of not trusting my judgment. For 3 years, you treated me like a child who was playing with toys instead of an adult who was building a business. Emma set down her phone and looked at me seriously. You're right, we did treat you like that. And the really frustrating part is that I actually am good at this. Not lucky, not in the right place at the right time, good at it. I understand technology, I understand business, I understand markets. But instead of recognizing that, you kept waiting for me to fail so you could say I told you so and guide me back to safety. Uncle Robert was still shaking his head in amazement. Sophia, Forbes doesn't just put anyone on their 30 under 30 list. This is a really big deal. I know it's a big deal. I've known it was a big deal for months, but I stopped trying to convince you it was a big deal because I got tired of defending my choices to people who had already decided I was making the wrong ones. My dad stood up and walked over to where I was sitting. What can we do to fix this? And that's when I realized something important. They wanted to fix this. They wanted to go back to the way things were before, when they thought I was struggling and they could feel good about trying to help me. But I didn't want to go back. I wanted to go forward. You can't fix this, Dad. You can't go back and retroactively believe in me. You can't rewrite the conversations where you suggested I was wasting my time, or the family dinners where you introduced me as someone who was still figuring things out. My mum started crying. Sophia, please, we love you so much. We just didn't understand. I know you love me, but love isn't the same as respect. And for 3 years, you've loved me, but you haven't respected my choices, my intelligence, or my vision for my own life. Michael leaned forward in his chair. So what happens now? I thought about that question for a long moment. What did happen now? I had proven them wrong, but proving someone wrong isn't the same as proving yourself right. I had built something incredible, but building something incredible isn't the same as building relationships with the people you care about. Now, I said finally, we figure out how to have a relationship where you see me as an adult who makes her own decisions, even when those decisions don't make sense to you. We can do that, my mum said quickly. Can you? Because this isn't just about my business. This is about trusting that I know what I want from my life, even when what I want is different from what you want for me. Emma was nodding slowly. You're talking about boundaries. I'm talking about respect. When I tell you I'm happy with my life, you don't suggest ways I could be happier. When I tell you about challenges I'm facing, you don't immediately assume I need rescuing. When I make choices that seem risky to you, you trust that I've thought them through. My dad sat back down, looking exhausted. This is a lot to process. I'm sure it is. You came here thinking you were going to convince me to give up on my dreams, and instead you found out my dreams are already coming true. Uncle Robert was still reading the Forbes article. It says here that you're planning to go public within the next 3 years. That's the plan. And you really started this whole thing in a garage. I did. He shook his head. And, Sophia, I have to say, this is one of the most impressive things I've ever heard. And I work with successful people for a living. Thank you, Uncle Robert. That actually means a lot. My mum wiped her eyes and looked at me with something I hadn't seen before, not just love, but admiration. Can you tell us about it, about how you built all this? And for the first time in 3 years, they were asking about my business, not because they were worried about it, but because they were genuinely curious about it. So I told them. I told them about the 18-hour days and the ramen noodles, but I also told them about the breakthrough moments when our code finally worked. I told them about the stress and uncertainty, but I also told them about the incredible feeling of watching businesses transform because of software we had created. I told them about my team, brilliant engineers and designers who had left comfortable jobs at Google and Facebook to join our startup. I told them about our investors who weren't just giving us money, but mentoring us through the challenges of scaling a technology company. I told them about the clients who sent us thank you emails, about the industry awards we'd won, about the conferences where I'd been invited to speak as an expert in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And as I talked, I watched their faces change. The worry was replaced by wonder. The skepticism was replaced by pride. For the first time since I'd started my company, they were seeing me not as a daughter who needed guidance, but as a woman who had built something extraordinary. "I wish we had known," my mum said when I finished. "I wish we could have supported you through all of this." "But that's just it," I said gently. "I didn't need you to support me through it. I needed you to trust that I could handle it myself." Emma looked thoughtful. "So when you were being vague about revenue and profits, I was being vague because I had learned that sharing good news with you led to lectures about not getting overconfident, and sharing challenges led to suggestions that I should quit." Michael winced. "We really did that, didn't we?" "You did, every time." My dad picked up his phone and read more of the Forbes article. "It says here that you're considered one of the most promising young entrepreneurs in artificial intelligence." "The most promising young female entrepreneur," I corrected, which, honestly, makes it even more frustrating that my own family didn't believe in me. Uncle Robert was looking at me with something approaching awe. "Sophia, do you realize what you've accomplished? Most people our age," hell, most people, any age, never build anything close to this. "I do realize it. I've always realized it. That's why it was so hard when the people closest to me couldn't see it." My mum reached for my hand again. "How do we move forward from here?" I thought about that question, really thought about it. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to make them feel as dismissed and underestimated as they had made me feel. But that would just be another form of the same dysfunction that had brought us to this point. "We move forward by establishing some new patterns," I said. "When I share news about my business, you celebrate it instead of warning me about potential downsides. When I face challenges, you trust that I can handle them instead of assuming I need to be rescued. And when I make choices about my life, you respect those choices, even if they're not the choices you would make." "We can do that," my dad said. "Can you?" "Because in about 6 months, I'm going to turn down a $2 billion acquisition offer from Microsoft because I believe we can build something even bigger. Are you going to trust that decision, or are you going to spend the next family dinner explaining why I should take the money and retire?" The room went quiet again. $2 billion. Even saying the number out loud felt surreal. Emma was the first to speak. "You're going to turn down $2 billion. "I am." "Why?" "Because we're not building this company to get rich quick. We're building it to solve real problems for real businesses. And because I believe that in 5 years, it'll be worth $10 billion. My dad started to say something, then stopped himself. I could see him fighting the urge to give advice, to warn me about risks, to suggest that maybe I should be more cautious. Instead, he took a deep breath and said, It sounds like you know what you're doing. I do know what I'm doing, Dad. I've always known what I was doing. I just needed you to trust that I knew what I was doing. My mum was crying again, but this time they seemed like tears of pride rather than worry. We're so sorry, sweetheart. We should have trusted you. You should have, I agreed, but we can't change the past. We can only decide how we want the future to look. Uncle Robert raised his coffee cup in a toast. To Sophia Chen, CEO and entrepreneur extraordinaire. To Sophia, my dad said, and for the first time in years I heard genuine respect in his voice. To my brilliant little sister, Michael added, who turned out to be way smarter than the rest of us. To family, Emma said, and to second chances. And as we sat there in my parents' living room, I realized something important. Success isn't just about building a company or making money or getting featured in Forbes. Success is about becoming the person you always knew you could be, even when the people closest to you couldn't see it yet. So, my mum said, wiping her eyes and smiling, tell us about this Forbes interview. What was it like? And for the first time in 3 years, I shared every detail. Have you ever had to choose between family approval and your dreams? Share your story in the comments below, because your journey matters and someone needs to hear it. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about turning doubt into success. And remember, the only permission you need to chase your dreams is your own.